Ladies and gentlemen, it'll take us a few minutes to get the room ready, so we'll start the meeting as soon as possible. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If I can ask members of council to take their seat, on va commencer la réunion pour le 20.
We'll be starting today's meeting. Welcome.
Of February 24th, 2016. For those who are able to, could you please rise for a moment of silence and moment of reflection and remain standing for the singing of our national anthem. And as we recognize the moment of reflection, it's with great sadness that Ottawa recently suffered the loss of a longtime municipal councillor, Egbert Bert Reitzma. Bert, formerly of Fitzroy Harbour, passed away peacefully in the Almont Fairview Manor Thursday, February 11th, in his 77th year. Mr. Reitzma served as a councillor for Ward 2, Fitzroy, in the former township of West Carleton from 1974 to 1982, and again from 1988 to 2000. I know that Councillor El Shantiri represented the city at the funeral and was a friend of Mr. Reitzma, and our thoughts and prayers go out to Bert's family and all those affected by his passing. Please join me in a moment of silence in commemoration of Mr. Reitzma, and at the same time we use that time for a moment of personal reflection. If you could remain standing, I'll ask our colleague, Councillor Brockington, to introduce our very special guest who will sing our national anthem. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Your Worship, fellow colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. This morning I have the privilege to introduce the Glee Club of St. Pius X High School, located on Fisher Avenue in River Ward. St. Pius X is one of 3 high schools in River Ward established in 1958. Notable alumni include actor Dan Aykroyd, retired NFL quarterback Jesse Palmer, and none other than my fellow colleagues, Councillors Shirelli and Eglai. Currently, the school has 937 students under the leadership of Principal Bill Barrett, also a graduate of Pius from 1978. I would like to welcome Principal Barrett, as well as I'd like to recognize School Board Trustee Kathy Ablett, was to be here today, but she couldn't make it at the end. St. Pius X Glee Club consists of up to 15 students ranging in age from 14 to 18 who have a mutual appreciation of music. They meet on a weekly basis and enjoy performing various show tunes and mashup themes. Although a relatively new club, recent performances include the Pius Pancake Breakfast this past December supporting Tory Mountain, and the Grade 9 Coffee House, which builds up school spirit. Led by Grade 11 students Anna Rikiki and Zoe Butcher, and supervised by Richmond Guerrero, chaplaincy leader of St. Pius School, they are very excited to perform our national anthem with us this morning. Your Worship, fellow councillors, ladies and gentlemen, the St. Pius X Glee Club.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons command.
thank you very much to the Glee Club from Pius, and thank you, Councillor Brockington, for suggesting that great start to our meeting today. At this time, I'd like to invite Elizabeth Desereau to the podium for this meeting's City Builder Award presentation. Welcome, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth's Councillor Jeff Leeper also to join us. J'invite aussi son conseiller.
I would also invite Elizabeth's Councillor Jeff Leeper to join us this morning.
And Jeff and I have exactly the same shirt on. In April 2015, Elizabeth, a lifelong non-smoker, was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. As a teacher and newlywed and mother-to-be, she refused to accept this prognosis. Comme enseignante, nouvelle mariée et future mère, Elizabeth refused d'accepter.
She refused to accept this prognosis.
Saying hello to Mom. Luckily, despite being 25 and 5 months pregnant with her first child, Elizabeth was surprised to find a rare genetic mutation which allowed her to qualify for alternative forms of treatment. In researching lung cancer, Elizabeth found that where it is the most frequent killer among cancers, the stigma attached to the lung cancer as a smoker's disease means a disproportionately low share of cancer research funding is allocated to it. Turning this impasse into opportunity, Elizabeth decided to become an advocate for lung cancer awareness and to do all she can to change the image and the conversation around lung cancer. Elizabeth has offered her services as a spokesperson and fundraiser to Lung Cancer Canada and Team Draft, a lung cancer awareness and advocacy organization in the States, founded in 2011 by NFL player Chris Draft and his late wife Keisha. Elizabeth took the opportunity to raise funds for lung cancer awareness last fall by designing and manufacturing white leather Just Breathe bracelets. And I think you have one right here. That's great. Oh, thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. And during this past November and December alone, Elizabeth raised over $10,000 for her respective charities.
During the past November and December alone, Elizabeth raised over $10,000 for her respective charities.
Façons. Elizabeth has also used her experience to advocate and raise funds for the planned molecular oncology diagnostics laboratory at the Ottawa General Hospital. Having a laboratory in Ottawa will help make genetic profiling of tumors a standard part of medical care, allowing physicians to determine which medications will work best for a particular patient. In addition to advocacy and fundraising, Elizabeth also blogs about her battle with cancer at From Lizzie's Lungs at wordpress.com. Thank you very much for your continued courage and selfless advocacy in your community. And on behalf of your Councillor Jeff Leeper, it's my pleasure to present you with the Mayor's City Builder Award. Congratulations and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to receive this award today. As a 26-year-old non-smoker who was diagnosed with advanced stage lung cancer when I was 5 months pregnant, I am living proof that anyone with lungs can get lung cancer. It is time to stop the stigma and learn about lung cancer. Lung cancer is a public health problem that needs to be taken care of no matter how it came to be. Lung cancer kills more Canadians a year than breast, colon, and ovarian cancers combined and is extremely underfunded. It is the world's #1 cancer killer, but only receives 7% of government funding and 1% of personal donations. Young lung cancer is on the rise, particularly in young, non-smoking women, and research needs to be funded to figure out why. With a 5-year survival rate of only 16%, few lung cancer patients are able to stand up here and advocate for the funding that is so desperately needed. It's time that these statistics change, because I know that my life and the lives of thousands of Canadians that are diagnosed with lung cancer every year depend on it. By sharing my story, it is my hope to change the face of lung cancer. Thank you.
And welcome to Elizabeth's family and friends who are here as well, and her son. It now gives me great pleasure to have this opportunity to announce the final achievement of the 2015 United Way Employee Campaign. Je suis très heureux.
It gives me great pleasure to have this opportunity to announce the final achievement of the 2015 United Way Employee Campaign in Ottawa.
On behalf of City Council and senior management, I extend a warm welcome to the representatives of United Way Ottawa and to our guests who are here today. I'd like to recognize Dan Chenier, General Manager, Parks, Recreation and Cultural Services, co-chair of the City of Ottawa United Way Employee Campaign. Where is Dan? Right in front of me. Lisa Hilaire, Chief Corporate Communications and co-chair of the United Way's Employee Campaign. And Lisa is right over there. United Way Centraide Ottawa representatives is Michael Allen here, our friend Michael. No, Sue Hutton, Senior Manager, Donor Relations and Accounts, and Marc Belanger, Donor Relations Manager, Accounts. I also want to express my thanks to the 2015 United Way Ottawa campaign co-chairs, Chief Charles Bordelot and Dania Verad, for doing such a great job. Employees at the City of Ottawa care about the community where we live, work, and raise our families. Les employés de la Ville d'Ottawa.
Employees at the City of Ottawa care about this community where we live, work, and raise our families.
Meaningful work the United Way Ottawa does in our community to change lives for the better. Since it was designated the corporate charity of choice for the City of Ottawa in 2001, the City has raised more than $7.4 million for the United Way Centraide Ottawa. Funds raised are 100% local, and the money you have helped raise will go towards making a difference in the lives of those in our city that need it most. I'm extremely pleased to announce that as of February 6, 2016, the campaign has exceeded our goal of $375,000 and has raised more than $385,000. The United Way tells us that this is enough to change 1,376 lives right here in Ottawa. I'd like to take an opportunity to recognize and celebrate the efforts of our employees in making this year's United Way campaign a huge success. Employees, as we all know, are the unsung heroes that have made a real connection with this important philanthropic campaign. Les employés sont des héros de l'ombre.
Employees are the unsung heroes that have made a real connection with this important community campaign.
With the United Way helps the city deliver excellent services to our residents in need and creates lasting positive changes in our community. Running a great team requires great leaders like Dan Chenier and Lisa Allaire, Bernadine Clifford, Renee Richard, and Christina Rogers, as well as the United Way Steering Committee made up of departmental representatives. On behalf of management and the entire city and my colleagues on City Council, I'd like to extend my very best to those city employees for stepping up as heroes for United Way to make this campaign a success. Au nom de la direction et de la...
On behalf of management and the entire city, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to city employees for stepping up as heroes for United Way to make this campaign a success.
Of our employees who've done a great job surpassing our goal this year. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Roll call, please, Madam Deputy Clerk.
Conseiller Manette.
Present.
Councillor Middick.
Here.
Councillor Harder.
Here.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Present.
Councillor Elshantiri. Councillor
Present.
Cawley.
Present.
Councillor Taylor.
Here.
Councillor Shirelli.
Here.
Councillor Egli.
Here.
Councillor Deans.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Conseiller Fleury.
Ici.
Councillor Nussbaum.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Councillor Leeper.
Here.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Chernyshenko.
Present.
Conseiller Cloutier.
Present.
Conseiller Blais.
Here.
Councillor Derouse.
Here.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Kakish.
Here.
Councillor Hughley.
Here.
Mayor Watson.
Here.
Le calamity 10, Monsieur le Maire.
Merci. Confirmation of minutes, adoption de process verbeux pour le 10 février 2016 for the 10th of February 2016. Carried. Declaration of interest, including those originally arising from prior meetings. Déclaration de conflit d'intérêt. None. Communications as printed. Regrets, absence, no regrets filed to date. Motion to introduce reports. Motion portant présentation de rapport. Councillor McKenney, and seconded by Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That the report from the Ottawa Community Housing Corporation entitled Confirmation of Re-election of Ottawa Community Housing, OCHC Board Chair, OCHC Board Tenant Representative Appointment, and OCHC New Strategic Plan, Environment Committee Report 7, Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 11A, and Planning Committee Report 21 be received and considered, that pursuant to subsection 35.5 of Procedure Bylaw 2014-441, Council receive and consider Planning Committee Report 22, Item 8 of the agenda, and further that the rules of procedure be suspended to receive and consider a matter rising from the Special Transit Commission meeting of February 24th, 2016 with respect to tentative collection agreements with the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU, Local 279, and the Canadian Union of Public Employees, CUPE, Local 5500. Waiver of the rules is being requested as it is in the city's best interest to consider this matter immediately.
On the motion, carried. Adopté. Merci. First item, Ottawa Community Housing Corporation, Société de Logement Communautaire d'Ottawa, confirmation of re-election of OCHC Board Chair, OCHC Board Tenant Representative Appointment, and OCHC New Strategic Plan. Carried. And we'd like to thank Stéphane Grégoire, the President, who was with us here, and thank you for the good work you and the Board and staff are doing with our tenants. Next is the OC Transpo ATU settlement. I know that many members of Council were here for the Transit Commission. I'd ask Councillor Blais if he could introduce the two motions, seconded by Councillor Kakish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank the management team and the bargaining team from OC Transpo for the long hours that went into achieving these agreements. Typically getting a phone call from John Manconi at 3 o'clock in the morning is not good news, but in this case, I think it was very good news for City and for OC Transpo riders in particular. So therefore, be it resolved that Transit Commission recommends that City Council ratify the tentative agreement reached with ATU Local 279 Conventional, and be further resolved that the terms of the tentative agreement be made public.
And would you like to do the second one at the same time?
The second one, Mr. Mayor, that the Transit Commission recommends that City Council ratify the two tentative agreements reached with QP 5500, Transit Safety and Enforcement and Transit Supervisors Bargaining Units, and be it further resolved that the terms of the tentative agreements be made public.
Okay. Comments on the motion? I'll just offer a couple of comments because, as I mentioned, this item was dealt with and we invited all members of Council to attend the Transit Commission meeting. But as all of you know by now, this 4-year collective agreement between the City and Local 279 of the ATU offers labor stability to over 2,200 OC Transpo employees, including all bus operators. The deal that was reached is within the mandate given by City Council to OC Transpo's management last spring and shows good faith from all parties involved. I want to take a moment to recognize everyone's hard work and efforts in getting to where we are today. Je veux reconnaître le travail et les efforts.
I would like to recognize the work and the efforts of all those who ensure the success of this agreement,
including Union President Clint Crabtree, as well as John Manconi and his team at OC Transpo, and Chair Stephen Blais and the entire Transit Commission. The fact that we were able to reach a tentative deal prior to the expiry of the current contract demonstrates our city's positive relationship with our union partners. With guaranteed labor stability until year 2020, this deal comes at a critical time and sets the table for a smooth implementation of the LRT's Confederation line. Avec cette entente qui nous offre la paix d'esprit,
because this will provide stability until 2020, we will be well positioned to implement successfully the Confederation line.
Transpo's employees, it's a good deal for our riders, and it's a good deal for our taxpayers. I'd like to ask all of you to support this motion and to ratify the collective agreement that is before us today. So we have two motions. The first by Councillor Blais, seconded by Councillor Kakish, is the ATU 279 motion. Carried. Was there a dissent? No. The second is QP 5500. Carried? Carried. Thank you all very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you all very much.
Environment Committee Report number 7, rapport numéro 7 de Comité de l'Environnement. Item number 2, Air Quality and Climate Change Management Plan and Renewable Energy Strategy Update. Received. Residential Protective Plumbing Program Review and Proposed Program Updates, Programme d'installation de dispositifs de protecteurs sanitaires résidentiels. Carried. Comments on the proposed Waste-Free Ontario Act and draft strategy for a waste-free Ontario building the circular economy. Councillor Leeper has a motion, seconded by Councillor Chernishenko. Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As this motion came originally to committee, it may have left the impression with some of our stakeholders that we would be tools down in the run-up to the final regulations for the Waste-Free Ontario Act. I have amending language that makes it clear that City is continuing to work on some important parts of our waste reduction strategy. The changes have been done in conjunction with staff as well. The motion is, whereas the staff report comments on a proposed Waste-Free Ontario Act and draft strategy for a waste-free Ontario building the circular economy, identifies the challenges of proceeding with Phase 2 of the Ottawa Waste Plan while the province of Ontario is making significant changes to existing legislation, and whereas Bill 151, the Waste-Free Ontario Act, which is still in second reading debate, is an enabling legislation which only provides the framework of the province's direction, and future regulations and policy documents will not be forthcoming for up to 5 years from Bill 151's adoption. And whereas staff's review of Bill 151 indicates that the Waste-Free Ontario Act may have a significant impact on waste diversion programs that the City of Ottawa provides to residents, and the Environment Committee, based on the staff report, is recommending that, although the source-separated organics program review will continue with the results reported back to the Environment Committee and Council, the City would be better served if the other work related to future waste management programs and policies affected by the proposed legislation be delayed until the municipal role is carried. And whereas Council wants to ensure that the recommended delays do not impede progress on Council's overall commitment to achieving its waste reduction goals as articulated in Phase 1 of the Ottawa Waste Plan, therefore be it resolved that City Council approve that Recommendation 2 be amended as follows. Approve the delay of the service delivery review of solid waste management services, the completion of the City's waste plan, and any related programs and policies affected by the proposed legislation until the municipal role is clarified, on the understanding that A, staff will continue to promote and educate residents on waste reduction, reuse, and recycling. B, staff will continue to monitor and assess the performance of the City's waste diversion programs by continuing to perform waste audits. C, staff will continue to participate in industry and municipality consultation intended to better define the municipal role and responsibility in the provision of waste diversion programs in the City under the proposed Waste-Free Ontario Act and supporting regulations, and provide updates on the progress of this legislation and any related regulations to the appropriate standing committee or committees and Council as needed or requested. And D, that in general, though the City would not proceed at this time with significant alterations to waste diversion program options or any program changes requiring capital investment until the regulations and policy statements under the proposed Waste-Free Ontario Act are fully understood, any alterations that might be deemed to be required due to unforeseen circumstances would be brought to Environment Committee and Council for consideration and approval.
Okay, so Councillor Hubley, is it a quick question, or should we come back to this?
Yeah, okay, let's hold it. There's others that want to talk.
Okay, so we'll come back to that item. Thank you. Next, climate change. I know we have motions and comments on that, so we'll come back to that as well. Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 11A, Nuisance Mosquito Control Program. I know there'll be questions on that, so we'll come back to that. Planning Committee Report number 21, Rapport numéro 21 du Comité de l'Urbanisme, zoning bylaw 900 Maryvale Road. Carried. Planning Committee. Councillor Fleury.
I just want to thank our provincial partners, this and the local councillor for this. It was a complex initiative. It is a health hub, and there's still elements that we're working on relating to the community garden. So I want to thank the councillor, but also our provincial partners, Minister Shirelli and Minister Nakvi, really helped us in this regard. Thank you.
Right, it's a great project. Planning Committee Report number 22, rapport numéro 22, part of 2168 10th Line Road. Carried. Dissent by Councillor Nussbaum. Bulk consent agenda. Does anyone wish to remove anything from the bulk consent agenda at this time? No. On the bulk consent agenda as presented. Carried. Okay. So we will come back to Environment Committee. Comments on the proposed Waste-Free Ontario Act and draft strategy. Councillor Hubley has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to know with Councillor Leaper's motion to put everything on hold on what the city's initiatives were on waste management, what's the impacts? If you recall, at the end of the last term of council, we had quite a discussion about the need to play catch-up after the loss of Plasco on investigating alternatives for managing our waste and reducing our waste, even more importantly. And I'm just wondering what the impacts on those initiatives would be. Are we going to not make any progress or what? So is Dixon here? Maybe he can answer.
Sorry, through you to the councillor. No, the city will continue to remain abreast of technological changes and awareness. We'll continue to participate with the industries and with the other municipalities to make sure that we're familiar with the activities and the changes. But if I can explain that the city is following a waste management hierarchy that has as its premier first three steps, the 3 R's being reuse, reduce, and recycle, before getting into the residual management piece, which was what we were looking to Plasco to manage. Because those first three steps are under a pretty significant state of flux with the change to the Waste-Free Ontario, it becomes very difficult to be able to predict and carry out analysis on that fourth step, being the residual management. So at this point, what this report is indicating, that with Council's approval, that we continue to participate in the development of the Waste-Free Ontario Act, stay abreast, of course, of technological change, but not proceed precipitously or prematurely on addressing the residual management piece, because it is going to be very dramatically affected by the province's change in regulation.
I believe in the last term of council, I had a motion that asked staff to report back to council on an annual basis on those alternatives and the research that's going on into new technologies and so on. Do you have an idea when we'll receive that report this year?
I will have to get back to you, check and see when we'll be coming back to you on that report.
Thank you. And last question is, when we extend these contracts, which contracts are we talking about? Is this the garbage collection contracts, those 6-year, they'll now become 7-year? Does this impact the Plasco, not the Plasco, sorry, the Orgawell contract?
Chair, through you to the councillor. The collection the two contracts that we're asking for extensions are the collection contract and the household hazardous waste special waste contracts. This has no impact on the Orgawell contract.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Dixon.
Thanks, Councillor Hubley. Councillor Moffat, please.
Thanks, sir. I should have asked this at committee last week. Do we have a timeline on when we expect the province to actually do something with this? We had met, I remember meeting with the minister 2-3 years ago about this, and they were working on it then. I know they've never really moved the fastest when it comes to waste matters at the province, so I'm just curious if you know.
Chair, through you to the councillor, the province themselves are unsure. They're identifying from 2 to 5 years to complete the implementation of these regulatory changes.
So the reason why we'd be delaying is because we don't think that they'll be done before we renegotiate the contracts in 2018.
That's correct. We don't believe that we'll have a firm understanding because, of course, before we go out to contract, we would need to carry out a service level review and then go to tender and then provide 12 months for the contractors to procure all the necessary vehicles and things. That lead time, when combined with the 2 to 5 years that they currently think, will push us beyond the current contract provisions, and for that reason we've sought Council's approval to extend the two series of contracts, the solid waste curbside collection and the household hazardous waste program.
Are you aware if other municipalities are doing the same thing?
I think other municipalities are looking at their own contracts in their own context. We're not all, of course, on the same timeline, and there are different service approaches. I do know that, generally speaking, the municipalities are taking a wait-and-see attitude towards much of this change, and it certainly does alter whether or not, for instance, you've got facilities that are involved in these discussions, if you've invested in those, and those what are being known now as stranded. That's the city is in a fortunate situation in that respect, that we aren't holder of those facilities, so we're in a bit of an advantageous position in that regard.
Thanks. My other questions were just related to what Councillor Hubley asked about Trail Road, the future Trail Road, where we go from there, and then, of course, the Green Bin program. You've answered those, so thanks.
Councillor Fleury, please.
Merci, Mr. Mayor. Just following up on my colleagues' questions, I wonder, as part of this review, have we articulated our wish regarding the IC&I sector? Because in the report and the submissions, we see that the diversion rates on the IC&I side are very low at 18%. Are we requesting, as part of this review provincially, any changes with regards to our authority for the IC&I sector?
Chair, through you to the councillor, we are the province has recognized the fact that the IC&I sector has fallen well behind the residential sector, and is through this regulatory change trying to move them to a much greater recycling participation. Our involvement in the review and generation of the new regulations will certainly be we will be providing that input, that from a community perspective we need to ensure that all groups, not just the residential but the IC&I sector as well, need to participate much more readily in recycling and diversion.
So you're saying the province has recognized it, but are we formalizing that request to the province? Because right now we don't have that authority.
No, Chair, through you to the council, no, as you're quite correct, Councillor, that the city does not maintain responsibility for managing that IC&I sector. That rests with the province, and the province themselves have to promote much greater vigilance on the part of the IC&I sector in order to advance that, and they have identified in the Waste Free Ontario Act that that's certainly part of what it is they're hoping to accomplish.
I'm not sure that I'm getting the answer that I'm looking for. Are we engaged in the consultation process with the province in this regard?
Yes, we are, Councillor, and yes, we are promoting the fact that the IC&I sector must advance in their participation in diversion. That's one of the points that we're suggesting go forward formally as part of the comments to the Act itself.
Okay, because as a member of the Environment Committee last term, I recall that some of the strategies for the master plan actually were hindered for us not having a fulsome approach to the entire sector. So I hope that going forward as part of the review components that we factor in all of the possibilities for the entire diversion possibilities or opportunities on our city boundaries.
And I think also Councillor Taylor might be able to confirm this. AMO is dealing with this issue as well as our voice at Queen's Park, if I'm not mistaken. That's on their priority list. Okay, thank you. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. perhaps it's the lawyer in me, but I'm not crazy about the wording in the last paragraph. Until the regulations and statements under the proposed Waste-Free Ontario Act are fully understood. That seems to me a little bit loosey-goosey, and I'm maybe looking to legal for this to give some sense of what the tipping point might be as to when we might fully understand. Because it seems that's the catalyst to whether we move forward or we don't move forward.
By tipping point, you don't mean in the waste sense.
In the waste.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm just trying to see which particular resolution the council was
It's in
referring
the
to.
very last paragraph.
It's vague. It's void for
It's paragraph D with the fourth line from the bottom.
loosey-goosey is the legal term.
Yeah. Just like, and who's done it?
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the member's concern. I'm advised that staff worked on this. If the member would like, I will have a moment to just check and see if there's something more suitable at wording to try to ensure that it's not vague or ambiguous in that regard.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go to Councillor Chernyshenko. We'll come back to Councillor Eglai once the solicitor perhaps comes up with a word that's agreeable to Councillor Leeper and Chernyshenko. So, Councillor Chernyshenko, the floor is yours, please.
Yes, please, and any clarity that can be offered there would be helpful to all of us. Quite simply, just so it's clear where Councillor Leeper was coming from and why I gladly seconded this motion and support it, is that it was brought to our attention by at least one delegation at Environment Committee that the way the report and recommendations read at the time left the impression that the city was just essentially standing down and waiting till the province gave us clearer direction, whereas in fact the city fully intends to continue doing what we do, and if I might characterize it, only better. So doing the same things we do now, but continue to look at how we can achieve better participation rates, better diversion rates, etc. But such fundamental changes to the way in which that the producer maybe full extent or producer responsibility, where imagine a bottler that's fully responsible for taking back their own material, that would have a fundamental create fundamental changes to what we collect and how we collect it and the money that we do or don't get from it. So any long-term plan that envisages major changes like that would be foolhardy to go right through on at the moment. But the key point here is that yes, continue to do what we do, only better, and yes, as Councillor Hubley pointed out, keep an eye on existing technology. So when we have that clearer signal, we're part of the way to being able to act. So for that reason, I support this, and I don't know if I'm done, but we're still waiting to hear from the clerk.
And here he comes.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, and I apologize for the delay. Staff were postulating on the fact that this legislation, being sort of a framework enabling legislation, will be similar to, in some ways, the Planning Act with guidelines and statements and principles and policies. So we would recommend, in light of that, more clear, would delete the words fully understood, and instead it would read, under the proposed Waste-Free Ontario Act are finalized, meaning that the Act is in force and effect, and then if there are any other principles, statements, guidelines, and regulations, that would be the approach we take.
So agreeable to the mover and seconder that we change fully understood to are finalized? Agreed. Councillor Eglai, agreed. Thank you for raising that. So on the motion, Councillor Condrey, did that clarify the issue you wanted to raise?
Yes, it does, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, great. So thank you all for your participation on the motion. Carried. And on the main report as amended. Carried. Thank you. The next is climate change, changement climatique. We have a motion from Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Chernyshenko. Councillor Harder, if you'd like to introduce this, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's on the screen now. Therefore, be it resolved that City Council approve that Recommendation 2C be amended to read as follows: that staff, working with the sponsors group, consisting of the chairs of Environment, Transportation, and Planning Committees and the chair of the Transit Commission, be directed to assess ways in which the city can help improve the energy performance of new and existing residential and commercial buildings. For example, a green building checklist to promote sustainable new construction, a green retrofit renovation checklist to promote the upgrading of existing buildings, guidelines and resources for better building performance, and working with Province of Ontario to progressively raise building energy performance standards mandated through the provincial building code, and report back to the appropriate standing committees and council with recommended approaches. And Mr. Mayor, if I could just have a couple of moments to speak to this, because I'm sure that many people are wondering why is Jan Harder moving this amendment to a motion on climate change. But I've met with Councillor Turnachenko a couple of times now on this issue, and I can say that staff, Ms. Snedden, has been meeting with the industry on the building industry on this too. And so I think it's important that we really don't put all of our eggs into the new build basket, because quite frankly it's already doing very much an on-track job. So I look at this as a very holistic approach. And I did have lots of questions as to how the targets would be set and success is measured. And I continue to believe that this process will be successful if, through the process of assessing the climate change impacts and how we plan to mitigate those impacts, that we base the founding assessments on fact, not just a sense or a feeling, or, as some are concerned, a fiction. For example, many would think that new construction could use a new regulation or two in order to improve, and that this improvement would see drastic greenhouse gas emission reductions, and in fact, development industry must be low-hanging fruit. Not true. And in fact, the new housing and commercial building industry is an underappreciated Canadian success story. Let me give you a few fun facts. Despite having 38% more houses in Canada than in 1990, residential emissions overall are down 11%. And new houses are 47% more efficient than in 1985, and this improvement has not been through codes, but through ongoing innovation and voluntary improvement, much of it thanks to government and industry collaboration in research and development. And lastly, houses today use 1/3 of the energy of a house that was built in 1975. And really, this is a kicker for me. Every dollar invested in the average existing Canadian home, so the renovations of existing Canadian homes and energy-saving renovations, will yield 4 to 7 times more greenhouse gas reductions than the same dollar spent on a new home. Why am I giving you all these facts? Because I want us to realize that we must be thoughtful and realistic with this motion. We must identify the real low-hanging fruit and action accordingly. We must set targets that are aggressive yet reachable, and they must be real and they must be measurable. And we must leave preconceived notions at the door and find real and meaningful process to reduce our footprint for future generations. My amendment calls for all changes affecting the greenhouse gas reductions and climate change to be considered by that sponsor group that I included in the motion, which is to include the chairs, as I said, from Environment, Transit, Transportation, and Planning, so that each proposal to reduce climate impacts in our city can be fully considered, measured, and vetted. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Harder. Councillor Brockington on the motion and the main report.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just the questions for the mover, the inclusions of the chairs of Transportation and Transit. Obviously, they don't have a lot of dealings with the buildings, but it's because the greenhouse gases is comprehensive, and that's why they're being included. It's just I thought this was more focused on the existing buildings and renovations. Who can answer that?
Well, it's Councillor Harder's motion, the inclusion of the Transportation and Transit chairs on the Sponsors Committee. The rationale for that.
And who's this, Councillor Brockington, that was asking this?
Yes.
Okay, well, obviously I mentioned the planning and the fact that probably you may not be aware that, for example, we don't have the right to change. We have to work with the province. The province has the lead on the building codes. But certainly with transportation, I mean, and everything that transportation is over, we're going to have a low-hanging fruit is definitely cars. It's definitely vehicles. Well, in both of those shops, we've got quite a few of those. And I think that it's very important that we be looking at each of the measures, that it should come back to the committee that's going to be impacted, and having the eyes of the chair of either of those, or myself, for example, working with the chair of the environment, is absolutely crucial, I think, to having that measured, vetted, rated, and go forward, so that we're all on the same page moving forward, and we can connect with our committees as need be.
I just want to make sure that everyone's on that committee can bring their expertise to it. I'm just reading the therefore clause. You're talking specifically about buildings, energy performance of new and existing residential and commercial buildings, so that's why I asked.
That's only because that's dealing with one specific part of the motion, the 2C.
And the timelines, what do we expect, how long this will take? When can we hear this?
Are you asking me? I'll be a sponsor. This is going to take, what are you asking me?
When will the respective standing committee receive the report?
Well, Councillor, quite frankly, we don't know that yet, because today we start part one of the process, and staff will take their due diligence. I mean, I don't know, maybe you haven't been on a sponsor group before, but those of us that have been on sponsor groups can tell you that staff work very hard. They bring to us, they check the water, if you will, by saying, yes, no, maybe so, and we go, absolutely not, or you're on the right track, they come back. And that's the value of having the sponsor group in place with the right people on it, Mr. Mayor. And so I can't say that.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that Councillor Chernyshenko can say that, and he's certainly been inside the tent working on this for quite a while now.
I appreciate if there's no answer. I just thought it was a fair question to ask that. I'm not questioning anyone's work ethic. I just thought if we were aiming for within this calendar year, or certainly this term of council, but I appreciate the fact that we don't know the exact timelines.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Brongton. Councillor Chernyshenko, please.
Yeah, if I may just try to address this question and then still leave myself the ability to perhaps sum up in the main motion. Yes, the short answer is we don't know. It is open-ended, but with the full intention to do it as efficiently as possible. These are issues that I believe are urgent to address, so there's absolutely no benefit in taking longer than necessary, but on the other hand, we want to do it well, so that leaves us with no better answer for you today than we're not sure, but we will do it in as efficient a way as possible.
Okay. Councillor Fleury, please.
I just have two small questions. I missed the Environment Committee. I'm sorry. But I was questioning myself on two components. The selection of the 2012 year. I'm sorry, I don't really understand. I wonder if my colleague could clarify this for me. And one of the critiques was that we are targeting a certain goal. Can we have firm criteria? So just wondering if the formula of a 5-year review is appropriate for like Transportation Master Plan or OPEDs, where there are every 5 years a review process. Is this included in what is being presented? I'm sorry I wasn't at the committee.
Please.
Yes, I'll do my best, but perhaps I will turn to staff to remind me and us what the current. We do have an air quality and climate change management plan. This is in a sense meant to supplement that, but I would envisage that on a regular basis. Is it every 4 years that the AQC-CMP we would typically review, or has that decision never been made by council as to what its update period would be?
Get a response.
Chair, through you to the council, the next update would be in 2019. So it's a 5-year, the last 2014 projected a 5-year report back cycle.
All right, Conseiller Fleury, c'est correct. Other comments on the amendment or the main report? Councillor Chernyshenko, were those your comments?
No, I'll wait. I see Councillor Hubley.
Okay, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll comment on the main report. I'm deeply conflicted with this because I appreciate the work of Councillor Chernyshenko and his committee on the efforts, except I was looking for some real targets that we could achieve. I thought we as a city had been making great progress on reducing greenhouse gas emissions on our municipal properties and the efforts that we make, our vehicles and so on and so forth. But I look around the country and I see cities like Edmonton that are expected to reach a 90% diversion rate this year or next, and we here in Ottawa struggle to reach 40%. Why isn't there targets for things like this in these goals? In Edmonton, they're reducing greenhouse gases by 150,000 tons a year and converting 100,000 tons of waste into revenue for taxpayers. I don't understand why we're not looking at serious plans like Edmonton did. And since being elected in 2010, I've asked staff to investigate and recommend alternatives such as single-sort programs, which are well up and running in Winnipeg and Fredericton, for example. I've encouraged the review of alternate technologies like incineration and other ideas, and yet today, here we are making plans for 2050 with nothing for 2020. So, unfortunately, I can't support this motion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hubley. Other comments? Councillor Chernyshenko.
Yes, thank you. And perhaps we are not at odds sort of at all or as much as it may seem, Councillor Hubley or others who did question the wisdom of a really aggressive long-term goal when charitably we have not been making particularly good progress to date on achieving even shorter-term goals. My motivation essentially for bringing this forward is that I believe, first of all, we now know that the best science is telling us that the 1.5 degree Celsius target is a critical breaking point at which we are likely to find ourselves on a planet where the runaway climate change is something that fundamentally changes the world in which we live. It's that science that drives the target then. So moving backwards from that is if by 2050, as seems to have been internationally acknowledged, we as all industrialized societies, in fact all countries, need to achieve an 80% cut, then let's adopt that target so we are very clear where we are trying to go, so that the ultimate where we must be by 2050 is set out there as much as it can be carved in stone, or at least held up there in front of us. But then we have to work back from that and say, okay, that's great, that's lofty, that's fine, but we already have, it's been noted, we already have the AQCCMP with targets for 2024. We will be stretching ourselves to get to those. They aren't really working in opposition, so yes, absolutely, the city has to redouble its efforts in areas like waste management and all the others. My initiative here was, in a sense, trying to highlight just how urgent that was and how important it was so that we do a better job in advancing in the short term as well. So long-term stretch goal, short-term realistic, year-by-year steps. The two I see as complementary rather than being in opposition. So whether that's convincing enough for Councillor Hubley to still has a chance to change his vote here, there's absolutely not meant to say, oh no, we love this long-term target, forget about the short-term. No, we're going to have to, and we have to do it better and faster. I would just probably use the 5 minutes, sum up by saying we had an excellent debate. It's quite clear, at least by the delegations and the public comment that we were receiving, that the citizens of Ottawa are very much on side, not universally, never expected that, but very much on side, encouraging us, and the hard work remains to be done. And I do want to thank particularly Councillor Harder, because she reminded me something I knew and yet was not reflected in this motion, which is, as some people have put it, 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 have already been built. Those are the ones that need particular attention. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying to push new buildings to a higher standard, but we should be doing both and giving particular emphasis to the renovation and retrofit of existing buildings. So I'm pleased that that was brought forward, and I think it made for a stronger motion and an action plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to lend my support to this motion and thank Councillor Chernyshenko for the work that he's done at the Environment Committee, and also thank Councillor Harder for the amendment that she has brought forward. Alors, je suis heureux d'appuyer cette motion.
I'm very happy to support this motion this morning. And the motion of Councillor Chernyshenko and the amendment of Councillor Harder.
Points have been made here, and certainly at the Environment Committee earlier this month, and I'm not going to reiterate them, but they do show that we are taking this issue seriously. I've had a number of meetings in the last 2 weeks with community groups such as Ecology Ottawa, Tree Ottawa, the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce, Ottawa Centre Eco District, Sustainable Eastern Ontario, Enviro Centre, and the Ottawa Renewable Energy Co-op. And the message I heard in these discussions is much of the same I hear in the community. Ottawa is leading the way on environmental issues, but we should always look at ways that we can do even better. Dans mes rencontres avec des groupes.
In my meetings with environmental groups in the past 2 weeks, I often hear the same message than in the community.
Here, climate change will be an even larger part of the municipal agenda in the years ahead. And I say this not because of any one person or committee or project, but because that's simply the reality we face in the 21st century. There's no ignoring it. The future success and prosperity of any city will depend on its ability to protect itself from and adapt to climate change. And I think we are poised for success. Je crois que nous sommes bien placés pour répondre.
I think we are poised for success.
Track record that we can all be very proud of. We're consistently recognized as a sustainable, livable, bikeable, walkable city. We're investing in zero-emissions light rail transit, which will bring the lowest reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in our city's history. We're cleaning up the Ottawa River. We're investing record amounts in cycling improvements and road safety initiatives, and we're working to plant more trees in our neighborhoods. And we continue to have the best drinking water in the world. The measures in this motion will build upon this important work, and I hope you will join me in supporting it. So on the motion, yeas and nays, please, Madam Deputy Clerk. So why don't we just do the amendment first on the amendment, carried, and then on the main motion, yeas and nays, as amended.
Councillor Hubley?
No.
Councillor Chernyshenko?
I tried. Yes.
Councillor Shirelli?
Yes.
Councillor Kakish?
Yes.
Councillor Deans? Yes. Councillor Taylor?
Yes.
Councillor Eglai?
Yes.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Fleury?
Oui.
Councillor Nussbaum?
Yes.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Yes.
Councillor Middick?
Affirmative.
Councillor El-Shantiri?
Yes.
Councillor Giroux?
No.
Councillor Moffat?
No.
Councillor Cloutier?
Oui.
Councillor Caudry?
Yes.
Councillor Harder?
Yes.
Councillor Manette?
Oui.
Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Councillor Tierney?
Oui.
Councillor McKenney?
Yes.
Councillor Blais?
Yes.
Mayor Watson?
Yes. Yes.
21 yeas, 3 nays.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is Finance and Economic Development Committee Report number 11A, rapport numéro 11A du Comité des finances et de développement économique. Councillor Wilkinson, Kakish, on an amendment on the nuisance mosquito control program. So we have Councillor Wilkinson to introduce her motion, seconded by Councillor Kakish, and then we're on to the main item. Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion is that City Council receive the information in the addendum to the Nuisance Mosquito Control Program and Mosquito Research Program Special Area Levy ACS 2016 CMR FED 001 report issued by Councillor Wilkinson on February the 19th, 2016. I approve that it be appended to the Nuisance Mosquito Control Program and Mosquito Research Program report. To approve a levy for special services to be applied to Ward 4, Canada North. The area identified in Document 1 for a 4-year Canada North Nuisance Mosquito Program is described in this report. Approve the City's participation in a 3-year research program on the Canada North Nuisance Mosquito Program as described in this report. And delegate the authority to the Deputy City Manager Operations in consultation with the City Clerk and Solicitor and the Ward Councillor to take the necessary steps to award the contract to undertake these programs to GDG Environmental and any other actions that may be required to manage this contract as described in this report. If I could speak briefly to all, introduce it, Mr. Mayor?
Yep. No, you have the floor now, Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah. This came up over the last year or so with the people that are concerned about the number of mosquitoes in the area. Didn't know exactly why, but we do have a West Nile program going on, and as part of that program, they actually do traps to catch mosquitoes in certain areas of the city, and they find the numbers and the types of mosquitoes. I now know that we have 40 types of mosquitoes here. 4 of them are involved with the West Nile project, and the others are not. What happened in our area, for some reason, is that the numbers have started to increase dramatically. And the company that does this sent me this information that from 2010 to 2012, there was a 34% increase. But then you had, compared to 2012, this is the following increases. In 2013, 63% increase. In 2014, 90% increase. In 2015, 63% increase. The numbers will vary a bit depending on the dryness of the year, etc., but there's definitely a thing forward. Although we don't know exactly why. They also said that in collecting the mosquitoes in this area, the highest ones were found in West Carleton, right adjacent to Canada North, and the others were in Canada North, and then the next one is in Stittsville. So that area, which has a lot of wetlands along the creeks, it has natural environment areas, it has the greenbelt next to it, we have a lot of areas where mosquitoes can breed, and I imagine that's probably why it's happened. So in looking at it, we did some research with the city staff, as Nick Stowe has been incredibly useful in looking into this. I said I wouldn't do anything if it was going to create a problem to the environment, because that's not why we save environmental areas. He did research and found that the research shows that the use of this ingredient BTI, which is a natural bacteria, it's actually a protein that will affect the interior of both mosquito and black fly larvae, because they have a very high pH level, and not other animals and not other greens. So it's a very effective, it's a natural material, it's not a chemical, and it's been used for about 35 years around the world, including about 60 communities in Canada, including Gatineau. It's used in Winnipeg in their citywide program as well. And it's approved by the World Health Organization, the U.S., Canada, all different ones for use in this ingredient. So looking into that, decided the only way to whether to do it or not was to find out what would be involved. So we went out and got a procurement. I want to thank the people in procurement who helped us in doing that. And we now have the 3 documents, the program, the research program, and the financial aspects. So we knew what it was going to cost before I asked the community if they would go into this. Went out then to the community to get a feeling for it. But legally, under this program, we do not need to have a vote, but I thought the community should have a say. And so the envelope that went out is a city envelope with rather large words that say what it is. And this was delivered to over 11,000 homes in my ward that pay taxes. Some people say they didn't get it, but Canada Post said they delivered it, so I had to take it that they did. And we did about 300 or 400 hand-delivered to meet them in other areas. It didn't reach 100% of people, obviously. Things do happen to these, but a large number. And we have 2,525 were returned, with a large majority in favor. I had no idea personally how that vote was going to go, because people don't like paying more taxes. And I thought it might go the other way, but there was a strong vote in favor of it. So on that basis, I brought forward this recommendation today to move forward with the program. Nick Stowe is here, who's done the work on the environmental. Part of this is that he wanted to be absolutely certain, because no research has been done in this particular area. So part of the program is that with the University of Ottawa, an independent study for 3 years of the 4-year program, to see if there are any detrimental efforts. So it is a combination of the 2 programs that I'm asking for support with today. And if we do get that, it's tight for them, but they can get the permits and things they need from the province to actually have this program go ahead this year. The cost to the average homeowner... You can wrap up, Councillor, because your time has gone over. The cost to the average homeowner is about $19 to $20 when the research program's on, but it varies depending on their assessment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Conseiller Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start by applauding the efforts of my colleague. I think when we have local issues, it's not easy to look into the matter, and the process by which Councillor Wilkinson went was the best one in front of us, is really trying to get the pulse and the feedback from the community. Now, I'm supportive of the direction. I'm concerned with a few elements. In the report, it's too vague in my mind, the public health response in this. I'm not aware of the product. We're not familiar with it. It hasn't been done before. It's a use of a bacteria. Can you tell me more about the health review or the health component and the risk that we know about this using this method?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just have to qualify and say that toxicology is not my area of expertise, but in my review of the literature that I did at Councillor Wilkinson's request, I did look at the studies and other literature regarding the public health aspects of the use of BTI and the other BS, which is the other larvicide that's being used, and there is absolutely no evidence of any adverse human health effects of these products, which is not surprising given that the mode of their action is so specific to that family of insects.
Yeah, I recognize you're not an expert in that review. I think that there's a broader issue here, that it's something that's trying to be leading edge. We want to make sure that there's no impact on other species, on the livelihood of residents. I'm concerned that we haven't done more research with chemicologists and other from the health field. Like I'm surprised public health hasn't been more involved in the process.
Through you, Mr. Chair, public health has been involved in the discussions. BTI is one of the products that is used in the city's West Nile virus control program. It has also been used extensively around the world for more than 30 years with absolutely no evidence of human health effects. It is approved for use in drinking water in some areas and has been approved by Canadian, American, and other health agencies around the world.
So this technique has been used before in other jurisdictions?
Yes, it has been used in other jurisdictions. Nuisance mosquito control programs are also in place in other municipalities within Canada using BTI.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is also with relation to the effect of BTI. My understanding is that it is specific to black flies and mosquitoes. I think it has an impact on midges as well. What does that mean for the species that rely on those as a food source? I'm thinking of bats specifically. We've had some residents raise concerns around that. Do we think that the diminishment of the population of these insects is going to have any kind of a meaningful impact on those higher order species?
Through you, Mr. Chair, when this project was first proposed, that is the concern that I brought to Councillor Wilkinson, in which she asked me to research more thoroughly and also to meet with GDG Environment to assess their methodology. And you're quite correct. The product BTI is very specific to a small family of insects that includes mosquitoes, black flies, and then a group called the non-biting midges. Okay. Those non-biting midges form the basis of the food web, the most fundamental level of the food web in most wetland communities. And so I did have a concern that this program could impact wetland communities and wetland food chains in some of our most sensitive environmental areas. I went out, I looked at the research on that, and first thing I established was that most studies, the vast majority of studies, had shown no impacts on chironomids. That chironomid is a Latin for the non-biting midges. It had shown no impacts on chironomids. The research also showed that the concentrations you needed to impact the non-biting midges were much higher than the concentrations that are needed for control of mosquitoes and black flies. And when I reviewed the methodology that GDG Environment uses in the application of this product, I concluded that their methodology was likely to also keep those concentrations well below
the levels that should impact chironomids. So my assessment was that the likelihood of negative environmental impacts was small, that the magnitude of any environmental impacts would likely be small, and consequently the risk to the environment was low, but not non-existent. And so my recommendation to Councillor Wilkinson was that if this program went forward, it should include an adaptive management program based upon independent research. And that if that research program showed that the program was having negative effects on those wetlands, that the program should be discontinued.
Are we proposing, or is the vendor proposing to monitor those populations of the non-biting midges? Will we be able to understand the impact fairly quickly?
Playing with my mic here. Yes, the impact on those non-miting midges is one of the is the main focus of the proposed research program, which would be carried out by a researcher and his graduate students from the University of Ottawa. So that is the main focus. We would not likely know after the first year. The nature of environmental impacts is that you normally have to monitor over several years because there are also other factors that will influence things like populations of midges. So we proposed a 3-year program, which we think is reasonable in terms of length and cost, and the focus, as I said, is on those non-biting midges.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor DeRose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very interesting program, but I know we've been all bombarded with lots of email, but I want to also thank my colleague, Councillor Wilkinson, for taking interest in this matter. My concern is a little bit different, on a different angle, and every time now we have an issue in the city of Ottawa as a council, are we setting a different standard that we can fix problems with a levy? You know, there is lots of people, maybe they cannot even afford the levy, and we are really looking into it. And are we splitting community? Are we pinning residents against each other? So that's a little bit concern I do have. My real question is this program will really wipe out the whole mosquito issues, or will residents be stuck paying this levy forever and ever, and that will never be able to the treatment, when you stop the treatment, the mosquitoes are going to come back. So these are questions and concerns that some people have. Thank you.
Were you looking for an answer, Councillor DeRose, or?
My question is, will this program will wipe out the whole mosquito issue, or the residents going to be stuck right now paying levies for the rest of their life because the minute we stop the program, the mosquitoes going to come back?
Yeah, thank you. It's a 4-year program, because we wanted to have the research program done. Also, there's a 3-year program, because that's what Nick Stowe had suggested, that we needed at least 3 years to properly do that research program. And that means that at the end of that, there's 1 year left while we analyze that and decide whether or not it will go ahead. It'll again be up to the residents whether they want to continue it. I'm going to be recommending that we probably, if we can, have a vote at the next election for them to decide whether they want to go ahead with it or not. It's something they're paying for. The cost actually starts to drop in the 4th year when you're not paying for the research program as well. So the average cost in the 4th year for them is going to be in the neighborhood of about $14. So it's, but depends on their assessment. That's the average. But it really is up to the residents. They have asked to have this coming. If it makes a huge impact, they may want to have it continued. But there's really not, it's something that they could stop at any time, because it is a resident-driven program, not a personal-driven program. And as far as the section of the Municipal Act is there to be used, it's been used before, and Councillor Young used it for a community association. Usually it's for something that's a capital item that gets paid over time. This is a bit unusual, but because it's only in one ward, it's the only avenue open to actually finance it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor DeRose. Councillor Chernyshenko.
Yes, thank you. I am going to be supporting this this motion, but I just wanted to flag a few concerns that I have had addressed, but really to highlight the importance. First of all, I am very wary of interventions such as this, given the long global history of human efforts to try to stop one nuisance with something else, which then led to totally unintended consequence, and on the circle seems to go. So it's absolutely crucial to me that that monitoring be in place and that there be a halt brought, or at least it be brought back to us quite rapidly if we find any such unintended, consequence coming. Particularly in the area of, as much as I could say mosquitoes, they get no respect. Well, they probably don't get any respect from me either, and I guess it's mutual. The fact is they are in ecosystems, they do play a role, and so I think it would be unwise of us to create an expectation around this city that whenever you have a nuisance, it will be dealt with in some scientific way. This does seem to be a particularly severe case in one, dare I say, isolated or specific area, and so I am prepared to support this pilot. We will certainly learn from it, but those are my real concerns, that we are monitoring carefully the consequences of one intervention, and that we are not just setting ourselves up for can the city please come in, and I do take a hand, this is going to be funded through a levy, but that somehow we can solve all nuisance problems, which will never really be the case. Thank you. Those are our comments more than questions.
Did you want some clarification from staff on the concerns that you had? Staff, can you just respond to the concerns that Councillor Chernushenko brought forward?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. The intent of the monitoring program is to ensure that we have the best chance of detecting any negative impacts on those ecosystems. We will be working with the researchers at the University of Ottawa to refine the research proposal to ensure that it is as effective as can be.
Thank you. Councillor Caudry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Just a couple of concerns and questions that are raised on the table. The involvement of the public health. The item did go through our public health offices, and Dr. Levy felt that this was more of a nuisance issue rather than a health issue. I do have Martha Robinson from Ottawa Public Health in the audience. If the councillor would like her at the table to answer any other questions, she is available, so I'll leave that out there for now. Question to Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Wilkinson, you mentioned a couple of other areas that may be affected by the mosquitoes. Is there any kind of a radius around where they're going to do the spraying? Are they going to be covering up some of those areas, or is that strictly for Ward 4?
Well, the method they use is not a broad spraying. What they do is they go in, they have to find the larva first because they have to get it at a certain point, and they have a backpack with a nozzle type of spray, and they just direct it directly on it if it's ready. In areas which they can't get into, they put the ingredient into a corn granular, and they drop them from the air as a granular, not a spray, so it won't spread around. And the way that they do it is they have a 2-kilometer area around what they call a protected area, which is the ward. So they will be in the other areas, and they have to have permission of landowners for any treatment that they do. That includes part of the Greenbelt, but they already have approval from the NCC to use this ingredient because they do the West Nile program for them, and from the city. And the city will have, lands will be involved and all the rest of it. So it will probably have a positive impact on the immediate adjacent areas too, because you won't be paying, but you'll get some reductions. That's a gift to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And just coming back to the question about Ottawa Public Health, Councillor, Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Levy is out of town on a city business, so that's why he couldn't be here. But as I said earlier, there is a representative here. So thanks very much, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Caudry. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say that as a longtime resident of Canada, I've always had the firm belief that all the pests do come from Canada North. So I really do appreciate the councillor's motion, and I'm happy to support it, and looking forward to a mosquito-free summer on the south side of Canada as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri.
I know that's going to be a tough act to follow, but nevertheless, on a day like today, we're talking about mosquitoes. So we heard it just came in from Roma, a rural municipality of Ontario, and we heard some concern about the beehive and the population reduced in the beehives. And so because some of the recommendation came in, I have to bring it to the city, the way we cut the grass close to the edge line and so on. So with this spray, and I have to follow my colleague David Chanchenko when he spoke about when we try to introduce another species to deal with one. I still have a memory in Constance Bay, the Turbolton Forest. So we had a porcupine and was really chewing on a lot of trees, so we introduced the fishers. So the fishers took care of the porcupine. Guess what? Now we can't get rid of the fishers. So there's no cats or small dog wandering around Constance Bay, that's for sure. But nevertheless, I'd like to know whether you or the public health can advise us about the beehive and if it have any impact on it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, all of the research indicates that there is no impact of BTI on outside of the family of mosquitoes, black flies, and non-biting midges. There is no evidence of any impact of this product on bees or in fact any other group of insects or animals.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres personnes qui veulent?
Any other comments on this topic?
Councillor Wilkinson, would you like to wrap up, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I want to thank all of the staff who've helped me through this process. It is complicated and different than we usually deal with, and the procurement people have helped with it. The health people who do the West Nile virus gave us information, and they actually helped in the evaluation of the proposals because they have some experience in that. The clerk's department, the finance department, certainly the planning department, and certainly I might say that Nick Stowe has been absolutely exceptional in looking at this and with a very open mind, but very, very carefully. And I believe in protecting the environment as much as probably anyone here. I'm a geographer by training, and that's something that's important to me. And so I didn't want to do anything that would hurt it. I'd put up with mosquitoes if it was going to do that. And so I really want to thank all that for it. And I thank my colleagues for the comments that they have made today and previous to this on this. I think it is worthwhile to do it. If we're going to find some things out with this program that may impact on other areas or may not, I can tell you that the procurement people suggested that when we did that included a clause so that if anybody else wants to do one in their area, they don't have to go out in the procurement. They can do it as an addendum to this one by just identifying the area and the payment area, and so that it would be easy for them to do that. So if you are interested in doing anything, just talk to me and I'll put you in touch with what happens on this. But I think we really need to have a few years of experience. We'll know whether it works or not. It certainly has in other communities. The company that won the contract is doing this now in 60 communities across Canada. When the City of Winnipeg does their own program citywide, because it's been known as the capital of mosquitoes, I think, but they've been doing it for some time, and their major ingredient they use is BTI, although they also use some other things there. And it's being used in Europe and South Africa. It's used around the world, actually. I found out that it's called Israeli Asset because it was found in Israel. What they found was a swamp that had no mosquitoes. And so they tested the water, and they found that in there's a natural bacteria. That's a protein bacteria, so this is not an artificial chemical in any way, that has this propensity to get into the guts of mosquitoes and black flies, and that's why they didn't have any. And that's the product that's being used. So it's an actual natural product that we find naturally in the earth. It's not manufactured except to put it into a form that we can distribute it in. And it is used mostly in a liquid form in the individual sprayers. And you will see them if you come out to Canada this summer, probably in their hip waders, going through that. But one of the things they're going to be doing is in sensitive areas, and we do have some endangered species with nesting areas, they will do those areas by air because they're not going to do anything to try to interfere with that. So I would ask for your support today, and we'll see what happens with this program.
Okay, so we have a motion, amendment by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Kakish. Carried on the amendment. On the main report as amended. Carried. Dissent by Councillor Moffat. Thank you. Motion to adopt reports. Motion portant adoption de rapport. Councillor McKenney, seconded by Councillor Brockington, please.
That the report from the Ottawa Community Housing Corporation entitled Confirmation of Re-election of Ottawa Community Housing, OCHC Board Chair, OCHC Board Tenant Representative Appointment, and OCHC New Strategic Plan, Environment Committee Report 7, Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 11A, and Planning Committee Reports 21 and 22 be received and adopted as amended.
On the motion, carried. Adopté. Merci. Motions of which notice have been previously given. Motion dont avis a été donné entièrement. This is a great tradition Councillor Dean started, I think, 20 years ago. Councillor Dean, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Well, and look at the progress, Mr. Mayor. There's 4 women sitting at the table. Rome wasn't built in a day, or even 2 decades. But I digress. The motion is to declare International Women's Day March 8th, 2016 in the City of Ottawa. This year's theme for International Women's Day is Pledge for Parity. The theme encourages women from all over the globe to strive for equal representation by gender in decision-making bodies. In Ottawa, that could mean gender parity around this council table, which regrettably has but 4 women currently, and on boards for large corporations, post-secondary institutions, and other organizations. I must say, in Canada, we've seen the positive effects of gender parity in our federal appointments, and I think it's so refreshing to have the leadership of Prime Minister Trudeau recognizing the importance of women by appointing 15 women to the federal cabinet, taking on such high-profile portfolios as Indigenous and Northern Affairs, Environment, International Trade, and Justice. But the road to equality is a long one. In 2015, the World Economic Forum predicted that it would take until 2133 to achieve global gender parity. And I can tell you, Mr. Mayor, I, for one, am not really prepared to wait 117 years for global gender parity, and I'm certainly not ready to wait even close to that long for gender parity here in the City of Ottawa and here at this council table. I said it last year, but I think it really bears repeating that we as a city need to take more action than we have taken to date. So often women feel left out from male-dominated positions of influence. As decision makers, we must encourage Canadian girls and women from all walks of life, especially women of color and those from disadvantaged backgrounds, to stand up and speak up. It's our duty to challenge conscious and unconscious biases against women in high-profile roles. We need to understand that women do not need to act or think like men to be successful. Rather, women and men both need to act like leaders, regardless of gender. Tuesday, March 8th, 2016 marks International Women's Day. It's a day to reflect on the impressive gains women have made in leadership roles, but also to acknowledge the need to constantly improve on equal representation. I encourage Council to recognize this day and those who continue to strive for equality and excellence for women. Together, I do believe that we can make a difference. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Other speakers on the motion? Carried. Thank you. Encourage members of Council, if they can, to attend my annual Women's Day breakfast. We have 2 federal cabinet ministers who are coming, the Minister of the Environment and the Minister responsible for the status of women, who will both be speaking. Next motion is Councillor Eglai, seconded by Councillor Fleury. This reflects a slight revision from what was tabled on February 10th. So Councillor Eglai has the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As pointed out last meeting, essentially what this motion does is it
give staff the authority to charge the same amount for the street side spots as we do for our patio fees every year. We had passed a motion earlier on dealing with patio, but street side spots at that point were not a thing. So now that they are, we want parity in terms of the cost that we charge businesses to operate them, and so that's what this motion does.
Great. Thank you to both you and Councillor Fleury on the motion. Carried. Adopté. Next is a motion by Councillor Leeper, seconded by Councillor Deans, with respect to the CRTC ruling. Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion that I'm bringing, I'll read it out first and then address it. Dealing with the recent CRTC decision, whereas in July 2015, the CRTC ruled that large cable and telecom providers would have to make their new fiber optic infrastructure available to smaller competitors, and whereas the decision made by the CRTC aims to promote competition and affordable internet for Canadians, including those residents living in the City of Ottawa. And whereas in the fall of 2015, a request was filed with the Governor and Council to review and vary the Commission's decision, and whereas a final decision has not yet been made by the federal government with respect to this request to review and vary, so the City of Ottawa still has an opportunity to share its position. And whereas other major municipalities such as Calgary have expressed their support for the CRTC decision, and where the City of Toronto recently carried a similar motion requesting Council support competitive and affordable internet prices, therefore be it resolved that the City of Ottawa support the CRTC's decision to require the sharing of fiber optic networks between large and small competitors, and be it further resolved that the outcome of this motion be shared with the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Canadian Heritage, and Premier Kathleen Wynne, and the Ontario Minister of Economic Development, Employment and Infrastructure, to ensure the City's position is known as recommendations are prepared. Mr. Mayor and colleagues, the motion that I'm bringing today and asking you to support is, I think, of the utmost importance to the residents of the City of Ottawa. The Internet has become integral to our participation in the civic, cultural, and economic life of the city. It's critical to residents' well-being that the Internet here be world-class and affordably priced. Last summer, the CRTC took a pro-consumer decision to extend its competitive framework for telecommunications to the next generation of Internet, fiber to the home. The decision would require incumbent telecommunications companies to lease their networks to competitors for a markup. This is at once a very complex issue, but also very simple. When the telecommunications industry was deregulated in Canada, as around the world, the government no longer told phone companies how much they could charge customers. And in the absence of rate regulation, we rely on competition to protect consumers. Competition is good, but it's not easy to accomplish when incumbent communications companies have access to the capital markets that are based on their existing revenues and subscriber bases, and access to our municipal infrastructure. Capital and infrastructure, our city infrastructure, are the barriers to entry that make the wholesale regime so important. The most easily that I've been able to explain it is to ask people to imagine the government were to open passenger rail to competition. No competition would emerge if we forced competitors to build their own tracks. It's not a perfect analogy, but the basics of it are right. We as a municipality have an obvious interest in these discussions. It's in the interest of Ottawa taxpayers that our support structures and conduits be used efficiently, that our roads not be constantly dug up. And more broadly, we want Ottawa residents to have the broadband internet they need in their small offices and home offices, startups, school, and more. We also have an interest in the economic activity that competitors to the incumbents create. That's hundreds of jobs in the Ottawa area alone. The federal consultation may be closed, but the government will be consulting with the provinces on this matter. I think it's important that our voice be heard. I hope I can count on your support, and I look forward to the debate. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Other comments? No. Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to Councillor Leeper for bringing this forward. And since he brought the motion of notice of motion to council 2 weeks ago, I've learned a lot about this. J'aurais aimé que mon collègue.
I would have liked my colleague to raise this discussion at the technology subcommittee or at FETCO so that we could have a thorough discussion
surrounding the motion, and Councillor, you alluded to the complexities surrounding the whole issue. The matter before the CRTC is to share a new network, not an existing network. On that basis, I'm not sure the rail analogy is correct. Other questions that came about are, how does this affect the western part of the country? Does TELUS and Shaw, who's very strong in the west, have to share their networks? Does Allstream and Videotron and Rogers in eastern Canada have to share their network? And you mentioned at a markup, but a markup on operating costs does not come close to relieving the risk of building a very, very huge infrastructure that's capital intensive. And you mentioned access by companies to capital markets. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have access to capital markets, but your point is that it is a capital intensive project, and in that there are risks. There are risks that remain solely with what is a private company, in this case Bell. I've read that suggesting that supporting this motion is a way to ensure faster and cheaper and more reliable Internet. It might be a disincentive to building a faster, cheaper, and more reliable Internet, because there are people calculating we have to sell X subscribers at X amount over Z years to recoup our investment, and thus, as I said, it might be a disincentive to building the network. Further to your rail analogy, if we were talking about existing rail, it would be a good analogy. But if we would like VIA, for example, to build a high-speed rail between Quebec City and Windsor, and we were to say go and spend $20 billion, but after the high-speed rail has been built, we'll let you and I buy a couple of trains, buy a couple of locomotives, and we could use it and sell as many tickets as we could. I don't think, and if that were open to all the users, I don't think that would be an incentive for VIA to improve our high-speed rail capacity. So on that basis, I disagree with the analogy. Notre objectif doit toujours être.
Our goal must always be to have favorable conditions for investment, for job creation in the large business sector and small business sector. And that's what I want.
Internet and lower prices, but we have to make sure that we put in the conditions that are favorable to building that network, to encouraging our second highest employer, business segment in Ottawa, which is after government, the high-tech sector. And so, again, just to recap from my opening statement, I wish we would have had the opportunity for a more substantive conversation on this, so that we could have discussed it more fully. But on that basis, and on the basis of the broad outline of what I've just said, I won't be supporting the motion.
Merci, Conseil. Councillor DeRuse, please.
And thank you very much to my colleague, John, he already brought lots of issue I want to just touch, but I will move on to also thank Councillor Leeper for his attention, his interest in this matter. But I also want to remind everyone here on this table, infrastructure for wireless or telecom, it's not a small investment. It's like similar to our LRT investment. Similar like any, you brought the train analogy, and I don't agree with it, but this is the matter here we're looking. CRTC 3 years ago want to regulate the wireless industry. So they went and they changed all the ruling, and they promised people that, oh yeah, your wireless bill is going to go chop half. It won't. Yeah, you put the 2-year program, and the company want to retrieve their revenue, so they raise the handsets higher. So what I'm trying to say, you have a Mobi City, you have wind. What we're trying to create here, there is an investment and a company putting infrastructure in Ottawa. We should encourage them, because these private companies invest millions and millions of dollars in economy and jobs. So for that, I can support your motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor DeRusse. Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did very strongly support the CRTC ruling when it happened, and I will be supporting Councillor Leeper's motion. For me, it simply comes down to equity and inclusion in our communities. We have got to be able to provide people with the choice that they need at an affordable rate, so that they can be part of our telecommunications community, if you will. We have got to make sure that that the networks are available to the smaller carriers. If we've got a digital divide in our city, when we're looking at our lower income neighborhoods, and we've got a significant amount of kids in this city who live below the poverty line, who count on school programs, breakfast programs. Those same families don't have the money for high-speed internet all the time. We cannot continue to broaden this digital divide that exists in our community. I've heard from dozens and dozens of families since last week who tell me that they can't afford the internet service that we have now. This would create 2 tiers. It would create one group who could afford the fiber to the home, and another group that couldn't. And it would also, unless we're making these networks available to the lower cost of smaller telecom providers, the lack of competition will mean that internet will only get more expensive. So, for me, it is a quality of life issue. People count on the internet for their news, for seniors to stay in touch. I heard from many seniors who tell me that they just barely can afford their internet today. It's how they stay in touch. Kids who are in school, whether it's in primary school or post-secondary school, it's a way for people to get information, and that does make it a quality of life issue. As a city, we do give up our right-of-way for the large telecoms to come in, and they come in, they cut our roads, bury their networks, and so as a city we have given something back to the telecommunications industry, and what we're asking back for, what I would like to see in return, is that those networks are shared so that everyone can enjoy the same level and the same quality of affordable internet service as their neighbor, regardless of their own income. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKenney. Councillor Minnick, please.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to preface this with, I'm a big Jeff Leeper fan. But I can't support this motion, mostly because I don't think it belongs in this room. The CRTC has already made a decision. They're the federally mandated body that regulates this, and to me, this motion just looks like a high five to them to say good job. I'm with them. Competition is good, but you know, in Jeff's opening statement, he talked about hundreds of jobs. Well, Bell employs thousands of people in Ottawa, over 4,000 right now, and I just can't support the motion because I don't think it's something we were hired to do. On this one, and as a citizen, I will absolutely support the CRTC in their decision. But as a councillor, I don't see the benefit to our taxpayers.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Minnick. Councillor Aguilar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank Councillor Leeper and Councillor Deans for bringing the motion forward. Jeff and I had quite a detailed and substantive discussion about it, and as a result of that, I want to thank Jeff because I dug into the issue a lot more than I would have thought. And like Councillor Cloutier, I learned an awful lot about this issue over the last week or so from a variety of sources, including Jeff, Bell, independent sources, independent research, speaking to a local MP, and it's not as simple as it first appears. It does appear that if you support this, that magically there will be cheap internet for everybody across the city. But when you dig down a little bit and you scratch the surface, you see that has not been the experience other places in the world that have tried to do this. Europe has tried to do this for years, and what they have found is that the impact of it is that the providers are not providing. In other words, they're not going that extra step. They're not putting that R&D in to come up with newer, faster ways to deliver the internet. They're not building the infrastructure. And I want to make a distinction between a provider and a seller. The big companies, if you will, the Bells, the Shaws, the Teluses, they're investing in the infrastructure. They're investing in the R&D. They're producing the product. The smaller companies are selling the product, and I think there's a big difference there. They don't have to put the upfront capital in to create the product, but they're reselling the product once it's been created by the bigger players. That doesn't mean I'm a huge fan of Bell or Rogers or anything else, but if we want to incentivize improvements in the internet, then there has to be some way, similar to the pharmaceutical business, whereby the people who put in the R&D work, the people who put in the implementation and the creation and building of these networks have some way to recoup some of that money so they can roll it over into further investments in R&D and infrastructure. So it's a more complicated issue than, I think, do this and people will have cheap internet. I don't think it's going to work that way. It hasn't worked that way in other parts of the world. As I say, Europe has been struggling with this for some time, and they have not seen the benefit of it, though they thought, like the CRTC, that this would be the magic bullet, if you will, to fix the problem. So on that basis, I won't be supporting the motion. I also, frankly, want to thank Councillor Minnick because I think he makes a very valid point about whether or not this is in fact within our bailiwick, whether this is something we should be dealing with, especially in light of the fact, if for no other reason, from a process perspective, the time for public input into this decision, I think, went back to December, which is long past. And whether they're going to be consulting the provinces or not, we're not a province, we're a city, and so I question whether it should be here. But whether it is or it isn't, for the reasons that I've set out, I'm not going to be able to support the motion, though I do thank Councillor Leeper for bringing it forward. I wonder why we didn't do this at the IT subcommittee, of which he's the vice chair. It seems to me that we would have had a more fulsome opportunity to have that discussion at that committee. But in any event, it's here. We're having the debate. I thank you for that. But unfortunately, Jeff, I'm not going to be able to support you in this matter.
Thank you, Councillor Aguilar. Conseil Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are some good points that have been raised so far. I think that one of the important points here is that we have to recognize our powers here. This motion is important, but does not reflect our role as a municipality. You're all right in your comments. I have no expertise at all in this area. The CRTC is a national organization that has consultation processes. We can be consulted on very many issues at all times, but this issue becomes a municipal issue in a way that we want to make sure economic development in Ottawa is at its best. We want to make sure that Internet is free. But nothing in this motion today will deal with this. So I have a very neutral opinion on this. It's too bad that we're going to have a vote because it puts us in a camp and it creates expectation, as my colleague said, as if Internet would be by tomorrow freer or better. I would have preferred to have this discussion in another context, where there would have been a formal consultation. Unfortunately, the resident is not here today, is not listening to the debate, but he'll see who voted for or against this motion, and no context will be provided to this listener. So it will just confuse people on the CRTC process, on the appeal that's now in front of the federal cabinet, on our role as a municipality in technology, in IT. So I'm in a difficult position because I find this motion is not going anywhere, but why wouldn't I support it in principle to say, oh yes, Internet should be improved and should be more affordable. On the other hand, I don't think that will end up nowhere. You know, I don't think it has any purpose, this motion. It's a good discussion to have, but the context is closed now. Maybe one day we'll have the opportunity to comment for the city to participate, but this is not a municipal framework, despite the fact that municipalities want to stimulate economic development and provide opportunities to businesses to want to settle in Ottawa. We often talk about Shopify, which is at the cutting edge of technologies worldwide. And in Ottawa, what do we want to be? We want to be there. We don't want to be on the back seat and not have an opportunity to compete. Yet, I don't think that this motion will make us more competitive. I know that the goal is to have a more affordable Internet, so I can't really be against that. But I remind you, I don't think this will solve anything today, unfortunately.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Blais.
I agree with all my colleagues who question why City Council is debating something that is a decision of the CRTC. But beyond that, I think the core goes back to innovation. And if we want to encourage Canadian companies to continue to invest in innovation, we need to give them the opportunity to profit from that innovation. People have spoken about equity. We have parts of our city that don't have high-speed Internet now. Rural Ottawa has very huge problems with high-speed Internet and the lack thereof. This will disincentivize anyone, Bell, Rogers, any company, from investing in high-speed cable or fiber-based Internet to our rural communities. To support this motion means supporting or being anti-rural Internet. So you're actually disincentivizing access to the Internet for thousands, tens of thousands of rural residents in our city. And we can't ask companies to invest in innovation if we're going to let small firms bleed off of that investment without having the proper opportunity to recoup those funds and continue to innovate. So I'd encourage people not to support this motion. We have no specialization in it. We have no regulatory authority over it. And frankly, it's actually will achieve the exact opposite results on equity that I think some believe that it will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Blais. Councillor Deans, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I am very proud to second this motion, and I would just like to say to my colleagues, I think it's absolutely appropriate for Council to take a policy direction position on this important issue. Last July, after considering a mountain of economic evidence, the CRTC made a landmark decision that will enable consumers to have access to the fastest Internet available at affordable prices. And to me, Internet needs to be perceived as a public good. This is 2016. I believe that the CRTC made the right decision when they opened up the fiber optic network of large corporations to independent competition. These larger companies have held a monopoly on the ability to build networks for decades. They've had access to our right-of-ways, protection from competition, and it has allowed them to grow into the giants that we know today. So I'd say to my colleague, don't worry about Bell. They'll be fine. They'll be fine. To my colleague, Councillor Cloutier, it's not a new network, as he seemed to suggest. Fiber optic has been around for years. Now we're simply talking about the last mile. That is the last piece that connects to the home. It's not a new network. It's an extension or an upgrade, if you will, to an existing network. We now live in a time when connectivity is not only desired by everyone, but it is an essential public good and should not be priced beyond the reach of many of our citizens. Students need to do research. The unemployed are accessing job openings, and the citizens here in Ottawa are being encouraged to do more and more online, from loading their Presto cards to paying their property taxes. To be competitive in the job market, in school, or just to be an engaged citizen, you have to have affordable access to the Internet. It's a public good. Unfortunately, access to fast, reliable, and affordable Internet is not necessarily as available as it should be. By opening up the networks, we can open up the market to more competition, which I believe will ultimately lead to better pricing and easier access for all Canadians. By allowing smaller companies to use existing cable, the City can also protect our right-of-ways. Every time you want to lay new cable, you're going to dig up our streets. Do we want everybody, or do we want it to be like cell towers, encouraging co-location? I mean, that's really, to me, what this is about. So, members of council, today I believe that we have a clear choice. The choice is between supporting Bay Street or Main Street. That's the choice. It's also about supporting competitive and affordable Internet, and I think the choice is clear. Thank you.
Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if I could, if I can beat that. So, when Councillor Leeper put this before us as a notice of motion, I must admit I didn't know a lot about the subject, and I had a similar question that I think a lot of our colleagues have as to what the municipal nexus is with regard to this issue. So like others, Councillor Aguilar and Councillor Cloutier and others, I dug into it a little bit and learned a fair bit. And it was interesting to read the City of Calgary submission, which was quite extensive. And this leads me to a question for staff, if they're able to answer it, and then after that, just a comment. One of the interesting things that I learned about the City of Calgary is it talked a lot, one of the main arguments it used for why they thought the CRTC call was the right one is they spoke about the fact that the City of Calgary is building out its own municipal network, and it imagines that there could be some downstream benefits to the city and to the residents from the ability to lease out some of the unused municipal fiber network moving forward, and clearly with that the CRTC call would be helpful to it in that regard. And so maybe just as a question to the city manager, if he's able to answer, I mean, have there been any discussions in the City of Ottawa, any plans, any discussions about building out our own municipal fiber network?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not familiar with the Calgary submission, but I can tell you that Mr. Sabashir and the Invest Ottawa and Hydro Ottawa team have been looking at what is developing in the municipal sector in terms of municipal public internet utilities and the strengths and weaknesses of those, but that work is very early and exploratory.
Okay, thank you for that. So, yeah, I guess, so one of the questions that I had to ask myself in looking at the Calgary submission is, can we imagine a point in the future? It sounds like we're at very early stages here. Calgary maybe is a little further along. But the idea of a municipal fiber network addresses a lot of public policy issues. Some of the issues addressed about rural access, about low-income access, some of those can be addressed by a municipal fiber network. And from what I understand from the Calgary case, the idea is that any of the dark fiber, the unused fiber, can then be activated and sold to ISPs, clearly in such a manner as to benefit the residents of the city. So that was an interesting argument, and one that we may want to think a little bit about, even if we're at earlier stages. Do we see, and this is where the municipal nexus comes in, some benefit to us to leave open that opportunity? Clearly, if that option is not available, there could be a loss to the future revenue potential for, I guess, either Hydro Ottawa or Invest Ottawa or the City of Ottawa, but, some combination of those. The other argument that the City of Calgary used, which, again, made me realize that there is a municipal nexus, is this issue of, are there existing legacy rights, or are we actually building a new network, or are we essentially building off of the old one? And one of the arguments the City of Calgary used is that actually the legacy rights can't be duplicated because there are access to existing alignments and the rights of way and support structures, and you think about the various poles and all of the structure there. So the conduits are there, and the City of Calgary argued quite forcefully that those do represent an existing legacy right to the big players that were actually subsidized off the public purse during the time that, in some cases these were public entities. And I thought that was an interesting argument too, that it gets to the VIA comparison, that there may actually be, a benefit there that the taxpayer paid for when these companies were Crown Corps, or at least, had access to public dollars. So I guess in reading the submission and then doing some of the other research, I came to the conclusion that this does, I think, fall squarely within what municipalities ought to care about. I think the rights of way argument is really important, and I think this idea of imagining an innovative future where there is a municipal fiber network is also kind of exciting and interesting as well. And so based on those two key arguments, I think Councillor Leeper's motion should be supported, and for that reason I will do so. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And after I listen to my colleagues, and I have a question for the clerk, and maybe we should have asked the question earlier. And I know the clerk shaking his head. Why is he asking me now? The question to the clerk is, this motion, after the CRTC already made their decision, what weight will this motion carry if whether we support it or not support it?
Mr. Mayor, I think what the councillor is referring to is the fact that the Canada Gazette notice, which went out on and has been referred to earlier in this debate, went out on November 21st of last year and asked for 30 days for consultation purposes. So that window closed presumably the third week of December. I would think that in most cases a motion at this point would have very little weight at all to the process coming this late in the day.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had a dilemma on this one. I recognize the motion, what it's trying to do is to get help of small owners, et cetera, to be able, small businesses, which I generally support. On the other hand, it's not quite clear whether we should be at this point putting in something when the period of time for comments is actually already passed, and with something which is not a general municipal one. And some of the comments that my colleagues have made about the fact that where this happened before, it doesn't automatically mean that the costs go down. And in many respects, the decision of CRTC is one that I think this motion says they should uphold that decision. And for us to start interfering with it at this time, when the final decision is what you really wanted, I just find it very, very difficult. So it's not opposed to what he's trying to get at, but I don't have at this point a comfort feeling in having been able to actually vote for it. I just wanted to, because I've talked to Councillor Leeper about this, and I told him that I was really seriously thinking about it. I've talked with others about it as well who have the other view, and I can either do one of two things, either vote against the motion or leave the room, and that's not a very good thing to do as an elected person. So I'm going to, at this point, not support the motion. I think it's not, I don't have enough information to make a really clear view on it, and I don't think what they're saying is going to happen. The motion doesn't make that happen, and that's the problem that I have with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Tierney, please.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thank you, Jeff, for bringing this forward. It's created a great discussion around technology, something I really love. I've looked at this very closely, and the fact that there's so many municipalities out there actually supporting Bell in their objection to the CRTC ruling made me question why. You look at the Calgary situation, they've got their own infrastructure, of course. They've got their own skin in the game. We used to have that opportunity when we had Hydro Ottawa and Telecom Ottawa, and as a matter of fact, I remember it very clearly when we were going to launch high-speed access through your electrical system at home, and then we sold off that asset that we had. It's unfortunate because we would have been genius today if we would have held on to that. High-speed internet is what is in all of our homes today. We would have made a fortune. That ship has sailed. Now we actually have to depend on companies to be able to do a lot of the work that frankly is very expensive. It's not like we're plugging in an extension cord. We're ripping up sidewalks. We're ripping up pathways to be able to put this fiber into the homes. I think there's a lot of other confusing factors that are involved in this. And in a 15-year career of IT, especially in the later parts of my years as a manager, I had to explain to VPs complicated issues and try to make them in simple terms. So if we want to progress and be a technology-savvy city, and I'll try to put this in simple terms, you see lots of these 4K TVs hitting the shelves now at your Best Buys or Blockbusters, I won't say Future Shops. And I'll tell you, when you get a couple of those in your house, people are surfing on their iPad, you want to watch some Netflix, you're going to start having problems. A standard Netflix show is about 5 megs. That's what you're using. You want to use that 4K TV? 25 megs. Compound that with your kid that's playing Xbox. This all adds up. And we're watching other cities all around us, and municipalities, I should say, jumping on and advancing themselves very quickly. If we don't take advantage of this and support Bell in finishing what they've started, this is a new technology. They're still working on it. They're still pushing through. We're going to fall behind, and we'll have this argument 5 years from now asking why other cities across the river, down the street, are already advanced and we're not. So for that reason, I do thank Jeff for bringing this forward. I think it's great talking about it. And as a final note, I will point out that our 33 branches do have free Wi-Fi and Internet access, so feel free to check those out. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Good plug. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kakish, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and I don't think we should be having this debate, but since everyone is and we are, I'll give my 2 cents on it. And like most of my colleagues, I did meet with Bell, with Jeff, and did get a better understanding of the issue. I think at the end of the day, as most of my colleagues pointed out and Councillor Chinnery just said, Bell is investing billions of dollars across the country. So the last thing we want to be doing with whatever our limited influence is in the appeal process is to have them not do that, especially in our city. But and so I see this more in terms of the analogy of R&D in the pharmaceutical industry and all the money that they pump into that, and then that's more the analogy I see. And so Bell is putting billions of dollars across the country, and you know, from what I'm hearing from the different sides, as a middle consensus, if there's interest around the table, and if Councillor Leeper is willing to do that, have some kind of grace period like they do in those industries, so that Bell can have at least a return on investment. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll leave it to Councillor Leeper to move forward if he wishes.
Great. Other speakers to wrap up? Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues. It has been a good debate, and I've appreciated the open-mindedness and generosity with which my colleagues have approached this over the past week. I would have liked to have brought this to the IT subcommittee. Our next meeting won't be until the end of March, and I am afraid of missing a window in which we can have a meaningful impact on this debate. While the federal government has not yet made its decision, we have an opportunity to sway the decision one way or another. I do fear that by March 30th, that window would be closed. We have heard from Bell and its lobbyists that the system that has been working well to foster competition generation, all the way through to the point where we are now, where fiber is getting pushed closer and closer to the node, to institute a wholesale requirement on fiber to the home would slow rollout. And I don't think that most observers are going to agree. RBC has stated that in the wake of the CRTC ruling, they expect that fiber rollouts will continue unaffected, partly because the incumbents can leverage their bundled offerings, and partly because of the somewhat higher markup, actually, that the CRTC will now allow on wholesale services. I went back to the decision, and some elements around deaggregation, really complicated stuff I won't bring to the table, also comes into play. I think it's worth noting that the incumbent telcos in this country are behind the 8 ball currently. They have just 38% of Internet revenues to cable's 53% as of the most recent numbers available from the CRTC. Competitors like TechSavvy and Primus have just 9%. Fiber to the home, in order to keep up with cable, is a competitive imperative for the incumbent telcos. Now, I know that Bell has spoken with many of you to suggest that the market for fiber is going to be competitive. They showed you a graphic that includes multiple players, including Rogers, Shaw, Videotron, TELUS, and it's true that most of these will be providing their own fiber services eventually. But the fact of the matter is, in any given market, the chances are that there will only be two, the phone company and the cable company. And that still means that virtually all residents are only going to have a choice of two. Very few would argue that a duopoly is much better than monopoly. Without companies like Primus or TechSavvy in the market, imagine what prices might look like for Internet today. In fact, I think the scenario that Councillor DeRuze raises is exactly the sort of situation that we want to avoid. By forcing mobile players to build their own networks, we've had very little competition to the incumbent providers, and I think most of us would agree that prices are higher as a result. So why would competitors get to leverage the incumbent's network rather than building its own? I think the best answer comes from the CRTC itself. They noted that the incumbent's carrier to deploy these facilities is based on decades of incumbency in the provision of wireline services, with all the associated advantages, including established brands and customer bases, existing network infrastructure, including support structures, national fiber broadband networks, pre-existing municipal access agreements, various economies of scale, and access to capital markets. Now, we've heard that this may not be any of the city's business. I personally think it's natural that we would want to support federal decisions that help Ottawa's residents stay competitive. And the aforementioned municipal access agreements are critical to keep in mind. We are one of the bottlenecks to competition. We have a responsibility to understand how that affects the larger public interest and to ensure that infrastructure is used efficiently. I think there are European models, to Councillor Eglai's point, where that's demonstrated quite nicely. Rather than struggling, if you take a look at many of the European markets, we take a look at places like Sweden, where 43.7% of the broadband subscriptions today are on fiber. Other European countries have similarly inspiring stories. Mr. Mayor and colleagues, even while Cabinet has closed comments for its deliberations, it is now obligated to consult with the provinces. Until the day that Cabinet's decision is announced, we have the ability to influence our federal and provincial counterparts. It was with this knowledge that our peers in Toronto undertook just over 2 weeks ago to pass substantially the same motion as I am asking you to support today. I hope that you will make a decision in favor of competition and consumers. I hope you'll make a decision that sees Ottawa evolve into the smart city it can be, and I hope that you'll support your residents' demand for choice. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. So on Councillor Leeper's motion, yeas and nays, please.
Councillor Hubley?
No.
Councillor Chernyshenko?
No.
Councillor Shirelli?
Yes.
Councillor Kakish?
No.
Councillor Deans?
Yes.
Councillor Taylor?
Nope.
Councillor Eglai?
No.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Fleury?
Wait.
Councillor Nussbaum?
Yes.
Councillor Wilkinson?
No.
Councillor Middick?
No.
Councillor El-Shantiri?
No.
Councillor DeRuze?
No.
Councillor Moffat?
No.
Conseiller Cloutier?
No.
Councillor Caudry?
No.
Councillor Harder?
No.
Conseiller Manette?
No.
Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Councillor Tierney?
No.
Councillor McKenney?
Yes.
Conseiller Blais?
No.
Mayor Watson?
No.
7 yeas, 17 nays.
Okay, the motion's defeated. Next is motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Eglai, because of the timing on construction at Bayshore on suspension. Carried. Councillor Taylor to introduce, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank Councillor Eglai for seconding this with me. As many of you may remember, Bayshore Mall in my ward has been undergoing significant renewal over the past several years, including a complete reconstruction of their main parking deck. They're now beginning work on the secondary parking deck at the side of the building, and they had come to us requesting waiver on a noise bylaw. We sent them back requesting that they do a very fulsome job of consulting with the community right around it. We have, I suppose, the good fortune that all of the residents who live there are all under one landlord, Fergus Lee Properties. They worked out details of an arrangement whereby they would make a cell phone number available to residents in all the buildings if they had any concerns. And what they're seeking, and the urgency is they want to begin the work now while windows are still closed, while it's still inclement weather. They're looking for a noise bylaw waiver, which I support. It's between 5 and 7 a.m. Prior to the regular noise time kicking in at 7. And although the timing runs from March to November, the reality is, just like when they were doing the first deck out front, they'd be using this sporadically between now and November, so only occasionally and only once in a while between 5 and 7 a.m., but they won't be able to predict exactly when. So this motion seeks the authority to allow them to waive it, but also includes the provision to have bylaw services revoke it if for any reason they feel it's not being kept up.
Okay, thank you. On the motion, carried. Adopté. Merci. Are there any other motions requiring suspension of the rules? Est-ce qu'il y a des autres motions? Notices of motion for consideration at subsequent meetings. Avis de motion pour examen à une réunion subséquente. Councillor Brockington, seconded by Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a notice of motion for our next meeting, March 23rd. It's fairly short. I'll read it. Whereas despite the fact that the City of Ottawa uses multiple initiatives to calm traffic and reduce the speed of traffic, residents continue to identify that the speed on local streets is an ongoing problem and a significant safety issue in Ottawa. And whereas the Ottawa Police Chief has identified traffic enforcement as one of his top 3 priorities, and he has confirmed that he supports the use of technology to help keep our roads safe, including speed monitoring devices like photo radar. And whereas the province of Ontario initiated the use of photo radar on provincial highways in 1994, but this was discontinued following the change of government less than 1 year later for what was considered by many to be political rather than safety reasons. And whereas a number of municipalities in Ontario have asked the provincial government to allow local governments to use photo radar and or other technology to address speeding on local streets. And there is a benefit to Ottawa residents to adding this ability to the city's current toolkit to address traffic and speeding in our neighborhoods. Therefore, be it resolved that City Council through the Mayor formally requests that the Province of Ontario allow municipalities the option of using photo radar on local streets. And be it further resolved that a copy of this request be forwarded to all local MPPs. So that's to be debated March 23rd. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We'll deal with that at the next meeting. Next notice of motion is by Councillor El Shantiri, seconded by Councillor DeRuse, with respect to increased paramedic service. Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and moved by myself and seconded by Councillor DeRuse. And if I can read this motion and bear with me. Whereas the provision of quality paramedic services within established response time as a priority of council and expected by the community, and whereas there has been 23% increase in paramedic response volume over the past 5 years, and whereas as a result of increasing response volume designated rural resources are often required to respond to the urban core where demanding as the greatest, and whereas consequently this creates a greater reliance on the surrounding municipality, which are then required to respond to the city rural wards, and where Council has directed staff to complete a review of paramedic services to identify current and future operational needs and efficiency opportunities, which is anticipated to be completed this spring. But there is immediate need for 12 new paramedics to respond to the current situation, where there is requirement for 4 additional emergency response vehicles to support the additional 12 paramedics, and staff has advised that there is sufficient funding in a development charge paramedic services account to accommodate the majority of the funding, with the remainder able to be accounted within the city-wide reserve fund. And therefore, be it resolved, on the understanding that the review of the paramedic services and future needs will be considered by Council prior to the development of 2017 draft operation and capital budget, City Council approve A, the addition of 12 paramedics in 2016 with a part-year budget requirement of $780,000 to be funded from the city provision for one-time and unforeseen, and B, purchase of 4 emergency response vehicles at the estimated cost of $260,000, with the growth portion of $220 to be funded from the development charge paramedic services account at identifying a development charge background study, and the non-growth portion, $40,000, to be funded from the citywide reserve fund. And Mr. Mayor, just like I know it's an awesome motion, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my colleague from the Rural Council, yourself and your office, and Councillor Dean, the chair of this committee, and our staff, especially the General Manager of Emergency Services, because this was quite a concern to our residents, and I want to thank you for allowing this. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your leadership as well. The next notice of motion we have is by Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Eglai, with respect to investment policy. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And Council may recall that back in 2008, this Council approved that the Mayor sent a letter to the Minister of Finance and Minister of Municipal Affairs with respect to Ottawa being granted the opportunity to get what is called prudent investor status. AMO has now proceeded to the point where they are requesting the same on behalf of all municipalities. So this notice of motion essentially is that we support AMO in that regard, and it has the support of our finance department. So it's a notice of motion.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll deal with that. Are there any other notices of motion for consideration at subsequent meeting? No. Motion to introduce bylaws. Councillor McKenney, seconded by Councillor Brockington, please.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings, be read and passed.
Adopté. Carried. Confirmation bylaw, règlement de ratification, Conseil McKenney et Brockington, s'il vous plaît.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of the 24th of February, 2016.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Clerk, are there any written inquiries? Adjournment, Councillor McKenney.
That the proceedings of the
city confirmation bylaw.
I just read it.
Yes, carried.
Carried.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just waiting for that. Adjournment. S'il vous plaît.
Let the proceedings of the City Council meeting of the 24th of February 2016 be adjourned.
The motion carried. Adopté. Thank you all very much. Merci. Meeting adjourned.